And so without smoothing, I'll just go into the Retopo workspace, and I can see how the Retopo mesh is dipped beneath that area, but that's no problem. Let's go to the brush tool, and auto snap is checked by default. So I can just tap, and that will locally snap. Alternatively, I can hold down the shift key, and that's going to use the brush as a smoothing brush for the Retopo mesh. You can right click and drag down to reduce the smoothing level so it's very faint or very subtle. And that way you are relaxing while snapping. Now, if you are working in areas like the corners of the mouth or corners of the eyes or anywhere where you have a lot of vertices that are trying to occupy the same region, you might get some snapping errors. So sometimes you may want to uncheck auto snap and then use your shift key and your brush to smooth or relax that area and then try snapping it. You can also use this as a move brush while auto snap is unchecked, and pull the offending area out, and then check snapping and do as I mentioned. You could either brush or tap. So that's how you would fit this low poly target mesh to your high poly sculpt while you are making these sculpting edits. Okay, so now that that is explained, let's go ahead and hide that copy. And I've got this version that I worked on. With the beard, I went to the sculpt workspace. On the voxel layer, I right-clicked and chose Retopo via decimation. This will send a decimated version of the sculpt object to the Retopo workspace to use as our baking target. When you get the decimation dialog, if you don't want any decimation, you just make the value 0. And that way it will not do any decimating. It will just simply send a copy of the sculpt mesh to the Retopo workspace. If I zoom in, see the original model is very, very dense. It's about 10 million polygons. All right, so again, I decimated that down. I'll turn the wireframe off. And as you'll be able to see, I was able to get it down from 10 million to about 180,000. It's always a good idea to fill any small pockets or voids that you may have in a mesh, especially if you're merging objects together or if you're working with the muscles tool in a fashion like this, where you've got a lot of little strands overlapping and it can create some internal holes or pockets. So you would want to right click and choose fill voids if you are in voxel mode. If you're working with the muscles tool to create strands for hair like this, voxel mode is the best way to go. You do have that option in surface mode, but the performance is better. It's just more flexible. It's just a perfect medium for sculpting hair like this. Then you go to the bake workspace, and the most common one is baking with normal maps. If you've got a lot of different objects, for example, if you have clothing, bracelets, and all the secondary elements that might go with it, like buttons and zippers and things of that sort, then what you would want to do is use the name correspondence for baking and name your layers accordingly. That way, instead of exploding the bake, in other words, instead of moving it out in 3D space to separate all the individual elements, 3D Coat will simply bake them in sequence. For example, if I have the beard layer here and I want it to bake only with the beard layer in the Vox Tree layer panel, then I would choose name correspondence for baking. But I want to make sure that my layers naming match. So I'm going to delete that layer. Okay. When you go to perform all your baking, you'll see the Bake Scan Settings dialog appear. And this will let you see the inner and the outer cage previewed. I'm going to click cancel and hide the beard for now. And Again, bake scan settings. I've already gone through and set this. You can scrub till you see none of the voxel object poking through. If some of your voxel object is poking through, then you will see some errors in the paint workspace with your result. Now, another thing you can do is use your brush to do this locally. So in other words, if you like the setting globally, but there are a few trouble spots, then what you can do is use your brush. This should pull this out. This pushes it in. And this one kind of relaxes it. This one will flatten. So let's go ahead and brush here. And I can see how it's pushing only this region out. This is really handy for working in very tight spaces. Just to clarify, once you go to the bake menu and choose your baking method, you would see the Bake Settings dialog panel first. I've already done all the baking previously, and we have our finished result in the Paint workspace. Now, when you go through the baking process, it's going to bring a copy of that low polygon target mesh that we had in the Retopple workspace. It's going to bring it in here, and now you've got a paint object. Again, low polygon in nature. But if I hide that, in the view menu, you can check Show Voxels in Paint Room. And the reason for this is the Paint workspace is shared between Paint objects and Sculpt objects. Sculpt objects is going to paint on the vertices of the model, and Paint objects is going to paint on the UVs live in the viewport. Okay, so as you're brushing to paint here, you'll see it in your 2D texture editor. If you're painting on a Sculpt object, again, you're painting on the vertices, so you will not have any UVs. So you can't really work in the 2D texture editor here. Okay. So yeah, I'll unhide the body here and make sure that Show Voxels in Paint Room is unchecked. So this is our final result before sending it back to 3ds Max. So we would repeat the same process that we did in the first video with the import. We want to import back into 3ds Max. And that's what I'm going to do here. Go to File menu. I have a hotkey already set for that Applink. So I'll hit that hotkey. And I'll hit OK. Okay, this is our round trip result. And that's going to conclude this look at export options and workflow with the Applink connection plugin for 3ds Max. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.